Ancient mariners crossed oceans with tools we would consider primitive. They sailed across the vast emptiness of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, reaching islands separated by thousands of miles of open water. How did they do it? This is not a story of luck or slow coastal creeping. It is a story of forgotten genius, of specific and brilliant engineering innovations that transformed logs and cloth into the spaceships of their age. By the end, you will understand the complete technological system that turned the impossible into a routine journey. We will uncover how they built hulls that flexed with the waves, sails that danced with the wind, and navigation systems that used the stars as a highway. What does it truly mean to conquer a frontier with nothing but ingenuity and courage? The open ocean was a different kind of monster altogether. For a coastal sailor, the rules were simple. You stayed within sight of the shore, a comforting line of trees or cliffs that told you exactly where you were. You could duck into a sheltered bay when a storm blew in. Fresh water from rivers was never more than a day away. This was sailing with a safety net, but to cross an ocean, you had to cut that net and step off the edge of the known world. The engineering problems shifted from manageable to existential. First, the sheer power of the environment. Out there, the wind does not whisper, it screams for weeks on end, driving waves that are not just swells but moving mountains of water. A coastal boat, built rigid and tight, would be pounded into splinters. Then there is the relentless, invisible push of ocean currents, vast rivers within the sea that could carry you hundreds of miles off course without you ever realizing it. You are battling forces that want to tear your vessel apart and then scatter the pieces. Survival itself becomes an engineering puzzle. You cannot carry enough fresh water for a voyage of months. You cannot pack enough food. The hull, constantly flexing and groaning under this punishment, will eventually spring a leak, and a single leak in the middle of an empty ocean is a death sentence. And above all, the navigation problem. With no landmarks, no reference points, how do you know where you are? How do you know which way to go? A simple mistake in direction means sailing forever into nothingness. This was the terrifying benchmark. Any vessel hoping to succeed was not just a boat, it was a self-contained world, a floating fortress of food, water, and human ingenuity that had to be stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than the sea itself. The standard tools of the maritime world were utterly useless here, so what did they build instead? The solution did not come from making a bigger version of a coastal boat. It came from rethinking the very idea of a hull. Ancient engineers looked at the problem of stability and saw a radical answer. Why have one hull when you can have two or even three? This was the birth of the multi-hull revolution, a leap in maritime thinking that turned a tippy, vulnerable log into a stable, ocean-going platform. The principle is beautifully simple. By spreading the vessel's footprint across multiple, narrower hulls, you achieve something remarkable. First, you get immense stability. A single, round hull wants to roll with every wave, but two slender hulls connected by a solid platform resist that rolling motion. Think of it like standing on one foot versus standing with your feet wide apart. The wider stance is inherently more stable. This meant sailors could carry massive sails to catch the wind without fear of capsizing. Second, you reduce drag. Those narrow hulls slice through the water with far less resistance than a single, fat hull, allowing the vessel to move faster with the same amount of wind power. And third, you create a brilliant distribution system. The platform spanning the hulls became a dry, stable deck, a perfect space for storing all the vital cargo, food, plants, animals, and families needed for a months-long voyage. The most iconic examples of this genius are the Polynesian double-hulled canoe, known as the waʻa, and the widespread Austronesian outrigger canoe. The waʻa kaulua was not a canoe as we picture it. It was two incredibly long, sleek hulls, each carved and shaped from massive trees, connected by strong crossbeams and a central platform. This was a colonizing ship. It could be as long as a modern tennis court, carrying dozens of people, their tools, their seedlings for taro and breadfruit, and even live animals like pigs and chickens. It was a floating village, a self-sufficient ark designed for one purpose: to find a new island and establish a life there. Similarly, the outrigger design, with a main hull stabilized by a smaller float attached by lateral beams, offered incredible agility and safety for both fishing and exploration. This multi-hull principle was the indispensable first step. It created the stable, capacious stage upon which all the other survival technologies could be built. But a stable platform is useless if you cannot control where it goes. But stability is only half the battle. A perfectly balanced ship that cannot move is just a floating raft, destined to drift wherever the currents take it. To truly command the ocean, you need to command the wind itself. This is where ancient sailors performed their second act of genius. They abandoned the idea of fighting the wind and instead learned to dance with it. The standard sail of the Mediterranean and Atlantic for centuries was the square sail, a simple, powerful sheet hung from a horizontal yardarm. It worked beautifully when the wind was directly behind you, pushing you forward like a hand on your back. But the open ocean is not that polite. The wind shifts, it comes from the side, it dies down to a whisper. A square sail is helpless in these conditions. It cannot generate power from a wind that is not squarely behind it. To cross thousands of miles of unpredictable ocean, you needed a sail that could pull power from almost any direction. The answer emerged in two brilliant, distinct forms, one in the Indian Ocean and one in the Pacific. In the Indian Ocean and later the Arab world, sailors developed the lateen sail, a triangular marvel mounted on a long, angled yard. This shape was revolutionary. It acted like an airfoil, like the wing of an airplane. When wind hit the curved surface, it created lift, literally pulling the vessel forward. This meant a ship could sail not just with the wind, but across it, even somewhat against it. A lateen-rigged dhow could point much closer to the direction the wind was coming from, a capability called windward performance. It turned the wind from a simple pushing force into a complex, usable resource. Meanwhile, in the vast Pacific, Polynesian and Austronesian engineers created something equally sophisticated: the crab claw sail. Its name comes from its distinct, arched shape, like the pincer of a crab. This was not a single sheet of cloth, but a carefully woven mat, often made from pandanus leaves, mounted on two curved spars. The genius of the crab claw was its versatility and power. Its curved shape also generated tremendous lift, allowing their double-hulled canoes to sail remarkably close to the wind. But it had another crucial advantage: it was incredibly easy to manage. By simply adjusting the spars, sailors could change the sail's shape and area in seconds, a process called reefing. When a sudden storm roared over the horizon, they could quickly reduce the sail to a small, storm-resistant patch, preventing a catastrophic capsize. When the wind faded to a gentle breeze, they could let it out fully to catch every last whisper of power. This was controlled propulsion, the difference between being a passive leaf blown by the wind and being a skilled rider, using the wind's every shift and gust to steer a precise course across a trackless sea. With a stable multi-hull and an intelligent sail, the vessel could now survive and move with purpose. But purpose is meaningless if you are moving in the wrong direction. To complete the system, they needed one final, and perhaps most abstract, innovation: a way to see the invisible path across the water. Yet a ship that can survive and sail with purpose is still lost without a map. The final and perhaps most profound innovation was not built from wood or woven from leaves. It was built from knowledge, etched into memory, and passed from one generation to the next. This was the science of wayfinding, a living compass that turned the open ocean from a terrifying void into a charted seascape. For us, navigation means looking at a screen with a blinking dot. For these ancient mariners, navigation meant reading the world itself. They developed a systematic technology that used every clue the environment offered. The night sky was their primary highway. They did not just know the North Star, they memorized the entire star compass, the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars on the horizon. A navigator would know that to reach a specific island, you must keep the rising point of a certain star directly over a particular point on the vessel's stern. As that star moved across the sky, another would take its place, creating a celestial path to follow. But the stars are only visible at night. During the day, they read the sun's arc, and the moon's phases gave them a rhythm for tides and time. The ocean itself held patterns. They learned to recognize the distinct, rolling swell patterns, refracted around islands hundreds of miles away. A seasoned wayfinder could feel a change in the rhythm of the waves beneath the hull, a subtle shift telling him an unseen landmass was altering the ocean's pulse. They watched the flight paths of birds. A certain tern flying out to sea at dawn and returning at dusk meant land was within its range. They read the colors and shapes of clouds. A greenish tint on a cloud's underside could mean it was reflecting the lagoon of a coral atoll still beyond the horizon. This was not mystical intuition, it was a rigorous, memorized science. In Micronesia, young men trained for years under Master Navigators, learning hundreds of chants and songs that encoded this knowledge, the star courses, the swell patterns, the bird species. They practiced in special schools, often while blindfolded, to hone their sense of balance and direction. The Navigator, or PWO as they were known in the Caroline Islands, was the most respected member of society, a human library holding the maps to their entire world. He would sit in the hull for the entire voyage, often going without sleep for days, constantly synthesizing all this sensory input, feeling the swell, watching the stars, listening to the wind in the rigging. He was the living GPS, the final, indispensable piece of engineering that completed the system. With a hull that could flex, a sail that could dance, and a mind that could see the invisible path, the impossible journey became a calculated voyage. But the most brilliant navigation in the world means nothing if your crew perishes from thirst or hunger a week into the voyage. The open ocean offers no resupply, no friendly ports. This presented the ultimate logistical puzzle. How do you pack an entire community's worth of sustenance into a confined, rolling wooden shell for a journey that could last months, with no guarantee of when you would find land again? The solution was to engineer the vessel itself into a floating, self-sustaining ecosystem. This was not about packing rations, it was about packing life. Food preservation was a mastered science. In the Pacific, staples were transformed for the long haul. Breadfruit, a starchy fruit, was fermented into a sour paste called ma in Polynesia, a durable, nutritious substance that could last for years. Fish were meticulously dried and salted, their protein preserved against the humid sea air. The humble coconut became a miracle of packaging, a hard shell containing sterile water and rich, calorie-dense meat, a natural survival kit. But they thought bigger than preserved goods. Archaeological and linguistic evidence strongly suggests they carried the very building blocks of a new life. Live animals like pigs, chickens, and dogs were carefully penned on the central platform. More crucially, they transported seedlings and cuttings, slips of taro root, shoots of sugar cane, and young breadfruit trees, their roots carefully wrapped in moist soil. The canoe was not just a vehicle, it was a traveling garden, a mobile farm carrying the genetic blueprint of their entire agricultural system. This turned the act of discovery into an act of instant colonization. The moment they found a new island, they could begin planting and raising animals immediately, transforming barren land into a familiar homeland within a generation. Yet all of this is meaningless without fresh water. Here, ancient engineers showed simple, profound ingenuity. They stored vast quantities in what they had, hollowed-out bamboo sections, which are naturally segmented, creating perfect sealed cylinders. Large gourds and sealed clay pots also served as portable reservoirs, but they could not carry enough for an open-ended voyage, so they engineered a resupply system from the sky itself. They possessed detailed knowledge of weather patterns and rain squalls. Their sails and the large, woven mats of the central platform were designed not just for wind, but as massive rainwater collection catchers. When a squall approached, they could quickly reconfigure the vessel, channeling every precious drop into their storage containers. This constant, active management of resources, this transformation of the canoe into a living, breathing micro-world solved the sustenance challenge. It meant the voyage duration was limited not by supplies, but by human endurance and navigational skill. The vessel was now a complete biological and technological package, capable of sustaining its crew from departure until they could recreate their world on a distant shore. Yet, even with a stocked ship and a clear celestial path, the ocean holds one final, relentless test, a force that can undo all planning. The ocean's power does not negotiate, it simply delivers a relentless series of impacts. A rigid structure, no matter how strongly built, will eventually succumb to that constant punishment. This is why the most vital innovation in ancient shipbuilding was not about adding strength, but about incorporating a deliberate, calculated weakness. It was the revolutionary use of lashings. In many of these great ocean-going cultures, from the Austronesian voyagers to the traders of the Indian Ocean, hulls were not nailed or pegged together rigidly. They were sewn. Imagine the planks of a ship, those long, curved pieces of wood that form the shell, being literally stitched together with incredibly strong cordage made from materials like coconut fiber. To our modern minds, this seems fragile, almost primitive. Why would you trust your life to a boat that is tied together with rope? The answer lies in understanding the nature of the enemy. The open sea is not a static force, it is a dynamic, twisting, heaving entity. A wave does not just hit a ship, it twists it. A rigid, nailed hull resists that twist. The wood wants to flex, but the iron nails hold it fast. This creates immense stress points, and eventually something has to give. The wood will crack along the grain, or a plank will split right where a nail is driven through it. A sewn hull, however, is a living, breathing structure. When a massive wave twists the vessel, the lashings allow the planks to shift slightly against one another. They flex, they groan, they absorb the energy of the impact like a spring, and then they settle back into place. The shock is distributed across the entire network of cordage, not concentrated on a few brittle points. This was durability engineered for reality. The cordage itself was a masterpiece of material science. Coconut fiber, or waʻa, is naturally resistant to saltwater rot. It retains its strength when wet, unlike many other fibers that would weaken and disintegrate. The lashing technique was also brilliantly repairable at sea. If a section of cordage wore out or was damaged, the crew could simply re-lash it using materials they carried on board. You could not forge a new iron nail in the middle of the Pacific, but you could always make more rope. This flexible construction meant the ship was not fighting the ocean. It was moving with it, a partner in a violent dance rather than a victim of a brutal assault. The hull could survive the journey because it was designed to yield, to give just enough so that it would never break. But a flexible hull is only one part of the equation for surviving a months-long passage. Even the most flexible hull and intelligent sail face a silent, relentless thief, the sideways push of the wind. You can point your vessel toward your destination, your sail perfectly angled, and yet find yourself drifting inexorably off course, pushed sideways across the water like a leaf skimming a pond. This frustrating phenomenon is called leeway, and for an ocean voyager, it is a navigational nightmare. A drift of just a few degrees over hundreds of miles means missing your target island completely, sailing past it into an empty horizon. Solving this problem required a stroke of counterintuitive genius, not fighting the wind's push, but using the water itself as an anchor. The answer was the invention of the leeboard and later the centerboard. This was the leeward shield, a device so simple it is often overlooked, yet it transformed directional control. Picture a large, flat plank of wood, almost like a fin, mounted on the side of the hull that is away from the wind, the leeward side. When lowered into the water on a pivot, it acts as an underwater wing or a brake. As the wind tries to push the broad side of the hull sideways, the leeboard digs into the water, creating massive resistance. It effectively gives the vessel a deeper, narrower profile beneath the waves, preventing that lateral slide. Suddenly, the ship's forward motion is purified. The energy from the sail is converted more efficiently into forward momentum rather than wasted on sideways drift. This single innovation dramatically improved what sailors call windward performance, the ability to sail closer to the direction the wind is coming from. It turned a hopeful course into a precise one. The evolution of this idea is a testament to practical refinement. On smaller vessels like the traditional Dutch fishing boats, leeboards were often paired, one on each side, with the crew simply lowering the one on the leeward side as needed. But for larger, open ocean vessels, this movable plank evolved into a more integrated solution, the fixed centerboard or daggerboard. This was a slot cut right through the centerline of the hull itself, through which a large, retractable fin could be lowered. The principle was the same, but the placement was more efficient and robust, providing balanced resistance directly under the vessel's spine. On a months-long voyage across the Pacific, this meant a navigator could hold a star course with far greater confidence. It meant that when supplies ran low or weather turned, the ability to claw their way upwind toward a known island group became a matter of survival, not just hope. This unassuming piece of wood, biting into the deep blue, was the final piece of control technology, the keel's clever cousin that allowed these ancient mariners to not just travel across the ocean, but to truly steer their destiny upon it. But a ship that can be steered is still not a home. For voyages measured in months, the vessel itself had to become a habitable world, a sanctuary against sun, storm, and salt spray. This was the final layer of engineering genius, the transformation of a sailing machine into a floating village. Ancient shipwrights did not simply add a cabin as an afterthought. They integrated shelter and storage into the very bones of the vessel. Look at the great Polynesian double-hulled canoe. The two sleek hulls were connected by a strong, latticed platform, but this was not an open deck. Upon this platform, they constructed a solid, raised shelter. Picture a long, sturdy hut, its frame lashed securely to the crossbeams, its walls and roof woven from pandanus leaves or other resilient materials. This was the deckhouse, a dedicated living space that elevated the crew and their most precious cargo above the constant spray and occasional waves that swept across the platform floor. Inside this shelter, families could sleep, communal meals could be prepared, and navigators could study their star charts in relative dryness. The design was profoundly intentional. By placing this weight centrally on the wide platform, it actually lowered the vessel's center of gravity, enhancing the stability provided by the twin hulls. This was a structure that served dual purposes, protection and performance. Within the hulls themselves, another storage revolution was at work. These were not hollow logs. The hulls were meticulously partitioned into separate compartments using bulkheads, walls built right into the interior. Think of it as a honeycomb structure inside the long, narrow hull. One compartment might be sealed for storing dried food, protected from moisture. Another might hold fresh water in bamboo tubes, carefully secured to prevent shifting. A third could contain the precious seedlings, their roots kept in damp earth. This compartmentalization was a life-saving innovation. If a leak sprang in one section, either from fatigue or a collision with driftwood, the flooding could be contained. The vessel would not fill with water and sink. It would simply ride lower on that one side, giving the crew precious time to find and repair the breach. This system of integrated shelter and intelligent storage solved the human equation of the voyage. It provided a psychological anchor, a place of rest and order amidst the chaos of the open ocean. The canoe was no longer just a vehicle. It was a self-contained ecosystem with a roof, a kitchen, a nursery, and a warehouse, all engineered to move as one across the trackless deep. This self-contained world also carried its own hospital. A voyage of months across the punishing sea guaranteed that something would break, fray, or spring a leak. To send a vessel out without the means to fix itself would be a death sentence disguised as exploration. So ancient mariners engineered one final, critical layer into their ships. They embedded the repair workshop into the voyage itself. The canoe was not just a transport, it was a traveling tool kit. Stored in dedicated compartments were the spare parts of their survival, rolls of extra sailcloth, woven from the same resilient fibers as the mainsail, waited for the day a storm might tear a panel. Great coils of coconut fiber cordage, the very threads that stitched their world together, were packed for the inevitable moment when lashings wore thin under constant flexing. They carried patching materials like resins and gums harvested from island trees to seal a leaking hull plank at sea. But they did not just pack materials, they packed the means of production. The archaeological record gives us glimpses of this mobile workshop. On remote Pacific islands, researchers have uncovered stone adzes, shell scrapers, and bone awls that do not match the local geological makeup. These tools likely arrived with the first voyagers, part of the essential kit carried in the hull. Imagine the scene after weeks at sea. A critical crossbeam shows a worrying crack. The crew does not despair. They retrieve the spare timber lashed along the deck, select the proper stone adze from its kit, and set to work shaping a replacement, all while the ocean rolls beneath them. This was not improvisation, it was standard operating procedure. It represented a revolutionary leap in voyage planning, moving from mere hope to calculated risk mitigation. The ship was designed with its own breakdown in mind. This philosophy transformed the nature of the journey. A breakdown was no longer a catastrophic end, but a manageable event, a problem to be solved with the resources at hand. It granted the crew a profound psychological resilience, the deep-seated knowledge that they could endure and adapt. The vessel's durability was not just in its construction, but in its inherent capacity for rebirth during the voyage, a floating testament to the principle that true exploration requires the tools to mend what the journey breaks. The ultimate expression of this maritime intelligence was not in fighting the ocean's rhythms, but in learning to ride them. After mastering the mechanics of the ship itself, ancient navigators turned their attention to the largest, most powerful features of the sea, the great ocean currents and the massive, circular systems known as gyres. These are not mere flows of water, they are the planet's circulatory system, vast rivers within the ocean that move with predictable, seasonal force. To cross an ocean efficiently was to understand this hidden roadmap and schedule your journey upon it. This was the science of gyre navigation, a long-term strategic partnership with the sea itself. In the Pacific, the North Pacific Gyre operates like a slow-moving clockwise wheel. Skilled Polynesian voyagers understood its dynamics. They knew that catching the westward flowing north equatorial current could carry their vessels thousands of miles with minimal effort, a free ride on a liquid highway. But the genius was in the return trip. They also understood the gyre's northern arm, the Kuroshio or Japan current, which flows northward and eastward. By sailing north to catch this eastbound flow, they could complete a grand circuit, using the ocean's own engine to bring them home or discover new island chains in a calculated sweep. This was not random exploration, it was systematic navigation on a continental scale. Similarly, in the Indian Ocean, traders harnessed the monsoon winds and their corresponding currents with calendrical precision. For 6 months of the year, the southwest monsoon blows from Africa toward India, pushing surface currents in the same direction. For the other 6 months, the pattern reverses with the northeast monsoon. Ancient mariners from Arabia, East Africa, and India planned their entire commercial year around this reliable pendulum. They would load their dhows with goods, wait for the seasonal wind to fill their lateen sails, and let the current carry them directly to their destination port. Months later, when the winds shifted, they would make the return journey. This transformed the Indian Ocean into a known, scheduled maritime network, where the timing of a voyage was as important as its direction. To utilize these currents required profound observational science passed down through generations. Navigators learned to read the subtle signs, the temperature and color of the water, the specific types of driftwood and seaweed carried by a current, even the behavior of marine life. They built this knowledge into their star courses and chants. A voyage to a distant island was not plotted as a straight line on a map, but as a curved trajectory that intersected with a specific current at a specific time of year, using that flowing water as a boost to cover immense distances that would otherwise be exhausting or impossible. This strategic use of planetary forces represents the highest level of ancient maritime engineering, moving beyond building a ship that could survive the sea to building a voyage that was empowered by it. This deep understanding of currents reveals the final physical mastery of the ship itself, the art of shaping wood to move with intention through moving mountains of water. Not all hulls are created equal for the open ocean. A flat-bottomed barge perfect for gliding along a calm river would be a death trap in deep water. With every wave, its broad, flat belly would slam down onto the water's surface with a bone-jarring crash, a punishing rhythm that would shake the vessel apart. Ocean-going cultures solved this by looking to the fish and the seabird, designing hulls that parted the water rather than fought it. They developed the deep V hull. Picture the cross-section of a classic Phoenician trader's ship. Instead of a flat base, the planks angled sharply downward from the sides, meeting in a deep, V-shaped valley along the centerline. This shape was a wave-piercing knife. When a swell approached, the sharp bow would rise to meet it, and the V-shape allowed the hull to slice into the wave, cutting through the crest with a smooth, rolling motion. The energy of the impact was dissipated along the angled sides, a graceful submission that spared the ship from a catastrophic slam. This same principle, refined to a razor's edge, is seen in the legendary Polynesian voyaging canoes. Their hulls were not just V-shaped, they were asymmetrical, with one side flatter than the other. This was a deliberate innovation for sailing performance, allowing the canoe to hold a tighter course against the wind. The sharp entry of the bow was a masterpiece of hydrodynamics, designed to enter the water cleanly with minimal drag, letting the vessel maintain speed even in rough conditions. But a hull that cuts cleanly is only useful if you can point it precisely where you need to go. For that, ancient mariners needed a new kind of control, one far more powerful than a simple paddle. They invented the mounted steering oar. This was not a handheld paddle used for gentle corrections. It was a massive, elongated blade, often as tall as a person, mounted on the starboard or steering side of the vessel's stern. It was attached to the hull with leather or rope grommets that acted as a pivot. A sailor would man a large tiller attached to its top, leveraging the water's resistance against the huge submerged blade. The physics were simple but transformative. A small movement of the tiller above the water would swing the great blade below, creating immense leverage to turn the entire ship. In a following sea, where waves push from behind and threaten to spin the vessel sideways into a dangerous broach, the helmsman could use the steering oar to keep the stern squarely to the swell. In fierce crosswinds, that deep bite into the water provided the authority to hold a course against the wind's constant push. This mounted oar was the direct ancestor of the sternpost rudder, a quantum leap in maritime control. It gave one person the mechanical advantage to command a large, heavily laden ship through the ocean's chaos, translating human intention into precise directional change. Together, the deep V hull and the steering oar formed the physical dialogue between sailor and sea, a conversation of cutting and turning that made the vast ocean navigable, one calculated wave at a time. This living map was not drawn in the stars alone, but painted across the entire seascape. The Master Navigator's true genius lay in building an environmental sensor network, using the sky, the sea, and its creatures as extensions of his own eyes. His vessel's effective range of sight stretched hundreds of miles beyond the physical horizon, a feat of biological engineering. He began each day by reading the clouds. A certain stationary piling of cumulus clouds, especially if they held a greenish or brownish tinge underneath, was not just weather. That color was the reflection of a distant island's lagoon or forest canopy, a phenomenon now called cloud color effect. It was a stationary beacon in the sky, pointing the way long before any land could be seen. Then came the messengers of the air. The navigator watched for specific seabirds with known habits. The white tern, for instance, flies out from its island home at dawn to fish in the open ocean, but it must return to land by dusk to feed its chick. Spotting these birds in the afternoon, especially if they were carrying fish in their beaks, gave a critical vector. They were not just flying, they were flying home. By observing their precise flight path, the navigator could trace an invisible line back to their nesting grounds, turning a simple bird into a living compass needle pointing toward safety. The ocean itself whispered clues through its pulse. Swell patterns, the great rolling waves generated by distant storms, travel for thousands of miles in orderly sets. When these swells encounter an island or submerged reef, they refract, bending around the obstacle. A skilled wayfinder sitting low in the hull could feel this change through the vessel's motion. The consistent rhythm of the open ocean would become confused. A subtle cross swell or a calming in the pattern signaling land was disrupting the deep sea's flow, sometimes over 100 miles away. Even the darkness of night held signals. In certain waters, the approach to land could be marked by a specific glow in the sea, the bioluminescence of microorganisms reacting to the disturbance of shallower waters or freshwater runoff. This was not magic, it was data. Each of these signals, a cloud type, a bird's flight, a swell's refraction, was a discrete, reliable data point in a vast, living navigation algorithm. The navigator continuously integrated this stream of information, cross-referencing it with his mental star chart and his sense of time and speed. He was the central processor for a sensor system built into the world itself, a system that transformed the entire Pacific from an empty void into a networked, legible space, where every ripple and every bird told a story of what lay beyond the curve of the Earth. While the Pacific danced with flexible hulls, the Mediterranean demanded a different kind of strength. Here, the pioneering traders of Phoenicia and later the Greeks faced a sea of brutal, short-period waves and rocky coasts, where a vessel needed to be a fortress as much as a sailboat. Their revolutionary answer was not found in lashings, but in the woodworker's most trusted joint, scaled to a monumental degree. They built their ships like fine furniture, plank by precise plank, using the mortise-and-tenon. This technique transformed shipbuilding from a sculpting art into a form of architectural assembly. Imagine the edge of a thick oak plank. Along its entire length, craftsmen would chisel out a series of rectangular slots, the mortises. On the opposing edge of the next plank, they would shape matching protruding tongues, the tenons. These were not mere pegs, they were integral parts of the plank itself. Workers would then carefully fit these tongues into the slots, hammering them home until the two planks locked together with a seamless, interlocking grip. The entire hull was assembled this way, a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece supported its neighbor. Once the skeleton was complete, they drove wooden pegs through the joints to lock them permanently, and then sealed every seam with heated pitch, a tar-like resin from pine trees, making the hull not just strong but watertight. The result was a hull of remarkable rigidity and strength, a single, solid shell that could withstand the pounding of Mediterranean storms without flexing or groaning. This rigidity was the key to their success because it allowed them to solve a different problem: heavy cargo. A Phoenician merchant ship was not a colonizing ark carrying life. It was a floating warehouse carrying wealth, amphorae of wine and olive oil, ingots of copper and tin, and luxurious glass. The mortise-and-tenon hull could bear this immense weight deep in its hold without distorting its shape or compromising its integrity. This robust construction gave them the confidence to push beyond the familiar. While their primary world was the Mediterranean, these strong, rigid ships are the very vessels that historians believe ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, and down the Atlantic coast of Africa in search of trade. They were exploring not to settle but to connect, and their engineering reflected that purpose: a watertight, cargo-hungry hull built for endurance across unpredictable, often violent seas. It was a blueprint for commerce, proving that the mastery of the open ocean could wear many faces, from the sewn flexibility of the Pacific to the locked-tight strength of the Mediterranean. Across the world, another maritime culture faced the same unforgiving equation of survival at sea and arrived at a different yet equally brilliant structural solution. While Mediterranean ships relied on rigid, interlocked shells and Pacific canoes on flexible, lashed connections, Chinese shipwrights pioneered a concept that would redefine internal strength: the compartmentalized hull. Their iconic vessel, the junk, became a fortress of the seas not through its outer skin alone, but through a revolutionary internal architecture. The secret lay in a series of walls built right across the inside of the ship, from one side of the hull to the other, and from the bottom of the hold to the deck above. These were the watertight bulkheads, and they transformed a single, vulnerable cavity into a honeycomb of secure chambers. Think of it like the interior of a submarine or a modern cargo ship, a concept the Chinese mastered centuries before it became standard elsewhere. The construction was remarkably straightforward yet profound. Using thick planks of durable wood like teak or camphor, builders erected these walls at regular intervals along the length of the hull. The seams between the bulkhead and the outer hull were caulked with a mixture of lime and tung oil, creating a seal that was both strong and flexible. This simple grid of internal walls solved multiple catastrophic problems at once. First, and most famously, it was an unparalleled safety system. If the hull was punctured, say by a hidden reef or during a naval engagement, only the single compartment where the breach occurred would flood. The watertight bulkhead would contain the seawater, preventing it from rushing through the entire length of the ship and dragging it to the bottom. The vessel could remain afloat, giving the crew critical time to effect repairs or steer to safety. This was not just an improvement, it was a quantum leap in maritime survival odds. Second, these bulkheads provided immense structural reinforcement. A long wooden hull, under the constant stress of heavy cargo and powerful waves, wants to flex and sag in the middle, a phenomenon called hogging. The bulkheads acted like the ribs in a human body or the internal braces of a bridge, providing lateral strength that prevented the hull from twisting or buckling. This allowed junks to grow to truly staggering sizes, with some historical accounts describing vessels over 100 meters long, floating cities capable of carrying hundreds of people and thousands of tons of trade goods. Finally, this design brought revolutionary order to the chaos of a long voyage. Each compartment could be dedicated to a specific purpose. One could hold fresh water in massive ceramic jars. Another could be filled with loose, heavy cargo like porcelain or stone for ballast, stabilizing the ship. A third could store perishable food, separated from dry goods. This compartmentalization made loading and unloading efficient, but more importantly, it created a predictable, manageable environment for the crew living aboard for months. The junk, with its distinctive battened sails that were themselves a marvel of aerodynamic control, became the ultimate expression of this organized, defensive philosophy. It was a ship engineered not just to sail the ocean, but to systematically defeat every threat the ocean could present, from a single leak to the immense weight of its own prosperity. This internal fortress mindset represented a third pillar of ancient maritime genius, proving that safety and strength could be built from the inside out. The Indian Ocean demanded a different kind of resilience. Here, the monsoons were not just weather, they were the calendar, a predictable, powerful pendulum of wind that dictated the rhythm of life and trade for thousands of miles. To harness this immense force, Arab and Indian shipwrights engineered a vessel that was both supple and strong, the legendary dhow. Its defining feature sounds almost delicate: the hull was sewn together. Using thick cordage spun from coconut fiber called waʻa, skilled craftsmen literally stitched the wooden planks edge to edge, creating a shell held fast by thousands of tight, fibrous stitches. This was not a sign of poverty or primitive technique. It was a brilliant adaptation. The Indian Ocean's waves have a long, rolling power, and a rigid, nailed hull would be subjected to constant, racking stress. The sewn hull, however, could flex. When a massive swell twisted the vessel, the waʻa lashings allowed the planks to shift minutely against each other, absorbing the shock like a spring and then settling back into place. The waʻa itself was a perfect material for the salt-soaked environment. It retained its strength when wet and resisted rot far better than many other fibers. This created a hull that danced with the sea rather than fought it, a durable, repairable workhorse built for the long haul. But a flexible hull alone would be pushed sideways across the water by the relentless monsoon winds. To convert that pushing force into directed power, they paired it with the ultimate sail for the job, the lateen-rigged. Mounted on a long, angled yard, this triangular sail was a masterpiece of aerodynamics. Unlike a square sail that simply catches the wind from behind, the lateen's curved shape acted like an airfoil, generating lift. This allowed the dhow to do something miraculous. It could sail across the wind, even somewhat into it. A captain could point the bow closer to the direction the wind was coming from, a capability called windward performance that was absolutely vital for navigating the complex coastlines and reaching specific ports against the seasonal flow. The synergy between the two technologies was perfect. The sewn hull flexed under the strain of the powerful, angled pull of the lateen sail, distributing the stress throughout its stitched network. The sail, in turn, gave the helmsman precise control to harness the monsoon's brute force for a specific course. This combination transformed the dhow into the semi-truck of the ancient maritime world. It was a cargo carrier of immense capacity, hauling spices, textiles, timber, and precious metals along the monsoon highways between the Arabian Peninsula, the western coast of India, and the Swahili coast of Africa. A trader in Oman would load his vessel with dates and incense, wait for the summer southwest monsoon to fill his lateen sail, and ride the wind and current straight to the Malabar coast. After months of trading, he would wait for the winter winds to reverse, catching the northeast monsoon for the return journey laden with pepper and gemstones. The dhow was not built for colonization or deep ocean exploration in the Polynesian sense. It was built for scheduled, reliable commerce over staggering distances. Its flexible, sewn body and intelligent, lifting sail created a system that turned the predictable violence of the monsoons into a renewable engine for trade, weaving together continents with threads of waʻa rope and woven canvas. The true genius of these voyages was not contained within the wood or the sails alone, but within a single individual's mind. Every innovation we have discussed, from the flexible hull to the reading of cloud reflections, converged at the station of the Master Navigator. In Polynesia, he was the Kahuna Hau'okul, a figure of immense spiritual and intellectual authority. In the Arab world, he was the Mu-2 BF-LLIM, the Master of the Sea. This was not a mere job, it was a sacred science, a social innovation that recognized the human mind as the most critical piece of onboard technology. His training began in childhood, a decades-long apprenticeship spent memorizing a living encyclopedia of knowledge. He learned hundreds of chants that encoded star paths, swell patterns, and the flight rhythms of specific birds. He practiced for long periods without sleep, honing his sense of balance and time, often in special schools where he would be blindfolded to sharpen his other senses. By the time he took command of a voyaging canoe, his mind held a dynamic, four-dimensional map of the entire Pacific. Aboard the vessel, his authority was absolute. He was the only one who knew the way. He would often sit in a sheltered spot, not steering the physical rudder, but steering the entire enterprise. His task was a continuous, exhausting synthesis. He felt the shift of swell patterns through the hull's motion. He watched the stars wheel overhead, checking their rising points against his mental compass. He noted the color of the water and the behavior of passing sea life. He listened to the wind in the rigging, a sound that told him of changes in pressure and weather. All of this raw data, from the ship's performance to the whispers of the environment, flowed into his consciousness where it was plotted against his memorized charts. He was the central processing unit for a network of biological and technological sensors, maintaining a constant, real-time fix on a position in a featureless blue desert. The crew's trust in him was total, for he held their collective fate in his memory. This human element was the final, irreplaceable engineering feat, the living brain that animated the wood and rope, transforming a collection of brilliant parts into a single, purposeful being capable of finding a speck of land across 2,000 miles of open ocean. But the true test of these maritime legends lies not in stories, but in the silent testimony of the seafloor. Archaeological discoveries have pulled these engineering triumphs from the realm of myth into the light of hard evidence. One of the most telling finds rests in the Java Sea, the Belitung shipwreck. This is the preserved hull of a 9th century Arab dhow, a trading vessel that perfectly encapsulates the system we have described. Its construction is the star of the show. The planks are not nailed, they are sewn together with coir rope, exactly as historical accounts described. Here was physical proof of the flexible, repairable hull designed for the long monsoon routes. Its cargo told the rest of the story, a staggering 60,000 ceramic pieces from China, alongside gold and silverware. This single shipwreck is a frozen moment in a globalized network, proving that these ingeniously built vessels were the vital links in trade routes spanning half the world, from the Middle East to the Tang dynasty. In the Pacific, the evidence is scattered like breadcrumbs across a vast blue canvas. The trail is marked by a distinct style of pottery known as lapita ware, decorated with intricate geometric patterns. Archaeologists find these pottery shards on islands separated by thousands of miles of ocean, from the Bismarck archipelago all the way to Samoa and Tonga. The distribution is not random, it forms a clear trail of expansion eastward. Each fragment is more than just pottery, it is a proxy for an entire voyage. It tells us that the people who made it carried not just their water and food, but their culture, their art, their identity in fragile ceramic vessels across the open sea, trusting their double-hulled canoes to deliver them safely. This pottery trail is the archaeological map of the greatest human migration ever undertaken, powered by the very ship technologies we have explored. Perhaps the most evocative window into this ancient maritime world comes from a late Bronze Age wreck off the coast of Turkey, the Uluburun ship. Dating to around 1300 BCE, this vessel was a floating treasure chest of the Mediterranean world. Its hull, built with the mortise-and-tenon technique, contained a breathtaking catalogue of international trade: copper ingots from Cyprus, tin from possibly Central Asia, ebony from Egypt, ivory from Africa, glass from Mesopotamia, and amber from Northern Europe. This was not a local trader. This was a bulk carrier on a diplomatic mission, a physical manifestation of the economic and political ties that bound ancient kingdoms together. The Uluburun shipwreck proves that the engineering to move such immense wealth across open water was not a later development, but a foundational technology of civilization itself, enabling the exchange of ideas and materials that shaped the ancient world. These sunken time capsules confirm that the innovations we have discussed were not theoretical. They were the practical, essential tools that built our interconnected human story. The silent testimony of shipwrecks and pottery shards is powerfully reinforced by a living, breathing kind of evidence. While wood rots and ceramics break, language endures, and biology spreads its roots. When we step back from the hulls and sails, we find that the voyages left indelible marks on the world itself, written in words and woven into ecosystems. The most compelling map of these ancient journeys is not drawn on parchment, but encoded in human speech, across a staggering expanse of the globe, from Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east, from Taiwan and Hawaii in the north to New Zealand in the south. People speak languages that are demonstrably related. This is the Austronesian language family, a web of over 1,000 tongues connected by a common ancestral language. The geographic spread of these languages is a direct, undeniable echo of the maritime routes taken thousands of years ago. Linguists can trace the branches of this family tree like following the wake of a ship. By analyzing core vocabulary, sound changes, and grammatical structures, they can reconstruct not just where people went, but in what order. The pattern reveals a clear story of expansion, beginning in Taiwan and moving south and east through the Philippines and Indonesia, then exploding across the remote Pacific. This linguistic trail tells us these were not isolated, accidental landfalls. A single castaway does not establish a new language. This was a sustained, deliberate process of exploration and settlement, where communities maintained enough contact over generations for their speech to remain part of the same evolving conversation. The language itself carried the blueprint of their maritime world, with deeply rooted, shared words for canoe, sail, paddle, ocean current, and specific navigational stars. Their vocabulary was a seaworthy toolkit, and its distribution proves the voyages were a repeated cultural tradition. This linguistic map finds perfect partners in the biological world. The movement of people is always accompanied by the movement of other species, a portable ecosystem carried in their canoes. The spread of specific plants and animals across the most isolated islands on Earth forms a corroborating timeline that could only be created by human hands. Take the humble sweet potato, a crop native to South America. For centuries, its presence across Polynesia, from Hawaii to New Zealand, was a profound historical puzzle. How did a South American plant become a staple food on islands thousands of miles away, long before European contact? The most logical answer points directly to those ancient voyagers. While the full story may involve multiple contacts, strong evidence suggests that Polynesian sailors, masters of the Eastern Pacific, reached the shores of South America and returned with this valuable crop. They recognized a good thing, packed the cuttings, and successfully transplanted it across the ocean, a feat of agricultural engineering that stitched two separate worlds together. Similarly, the Pacific rat, a distinct species not found in the Americas, hitched a ride with these explorers. Its bones appear in the earliest archaeological layers on many islands, a stowaway that became part of the new landscape. And then there is the chicken, DNA studies have traced the lineage of chickens found on Polynesian islands back to Southeast Asia, not from later European introductions. These animals were not swimming across oceans, they were traveling in the hulls of voyaging canoes, part of the deliberate cargo of a colonizing mission. Each of these biological signatures, the sweet potato in a garden, the rat bones in an ancient fire pit, the distinct chicken DNA, is a data point. Together, they create a scatterplot across the Pacific that aligns perfectly with the linguistic and archaeological evidence. They tell us that the settlement of these islands was not a series of desperate, one-time survival events. It was a systematic, knowledgeable expansion. People arrived with the full intention of staying, bringing the plants to feed them and the animals to sustain them, transforming each new island into a familiar home. This biological trail turns speculation into near certainty, proving that the ocean was not a barrier but a connective highway for life itself. Yet even the most brilliant engineering and the sharpest human mind could not erase the fundamental reality of the open ocean. These innovations were a shield, not an invincibility cloak. They managed staggering risk, but they could never eliminate it entirely. And to understand their true achievement, we must also acknowledge the darkness that lay beyond their reach. For all their skill, ancient mariners sailed into a realm of absolute uncertainty, where a single, prolonged break in the weather could spell disaster. The navigator's celestial map depended on a clear sky. What happened when the clouds closed in for days or weeks on end, blotting out the sun and stars? In that gray, featureless void, the vessel became a blindfolded traveler. The navigator had to rely on dead reckoning, estimating position based on last known speed and direction, a method where errors compounded with every passing hour. A storm that blew them off course, followed by a week of overcast skies, could leave them truly and terrifyingly lost, with no way to recalculate their path until the heavens cleared. The psychological toll of this, sailing on faith alone across an endless gray sea, is almost unimaginable. Then there were the silent, creeping threats within the ship itself. Despite ingenious food preservation and water collection, voyages could simply last too long. If expected rains did not come, or if a storage compartment was contaminated, the specter of thirst and hunger became a very real passenger. And while they carried a pharmacopoeia of plants for various ailments, one specific health challenge remained a persistent shadow: the slow weakening now understood as scurvy from a lack of certain vitamins. It was a gradual thief of strength, making every task harder and every decision slower, a hidden tax paid for months at sea. And of course, there was the raw, unmediated power of the sea itself. Even a hull designed to flex and a sail made to reef could meet a storm of such colossal fury that it surpassed all design parameters. A rogue wave of a scale we still struggle to predict could simply overwhelm the vessel, or a sustained hurricane-force wind could tear the rigging apart. The archaeological record is necessarily silent on these complete losses, the voyages that never made landfall. We see only the successes, but logic and respect demand we recognize that for every community that founded a new island, there were almost certainly others that vanished into the deep, their stories and innovations lost with them. This context does not diminish their accomplishments, it magnifies them. It underscores that their courage was not born from ignorance of the danger, but from a profound acceptance of it. They weighed the risks, built the very best systems human ingenuity could devise to mitigate them, and then set sail anyway, embracing the terrible and beautiful uncertainty that lay beyond the horizon. Their legacy is not one of perfect safety, but of transcendent bravery in the face of the unknown. This stark contrast in maritime history points to a profound question of geography and culture. Why did the Pacific and Indian Oceans become bustling highways of sustained, two-way voyaging, while the vast Atlantic, for all its legends of Phoenician or Roman crossings, shows no clear evidence of a regular, reciprocal trade route in antiquity. The answer lies not in the raw difficulty of the ocean itself, but in what lay on the other side. For the Polynesian voyager, every journey into the eastern Pacific was a calculated gamble into the unknown, but it was a gamble with a potential prize of immense value, a new habitable island. The cultural engine was colonization, the deep drive to find and settle new lands, which justified the immense investment in refining canoe technology, navigation science, and the portable ecosystem. Similarly, in the Indian Ocean, the monsoons created a predictable pendulum between known, wealthy civilizations, from East Africa to India and Southeast Asia. The prize was established trade in spices, textiles, and luxuries. The engineering of the dhow was refined over centuries because it reliably paid for itself, connecting existing points of a commercial network. The Atlantic presented a different equation. From the perspective of Mediterranean civilizations, crossing the Strait of Gibraltar meant sailing into an ocean that seemed to offer no clear destination. Ancient geographers theorized about lands beyond, but without the certainty of a trading partner or a confirmed fertile landfall. The motivation for developing and sustaining a dedicated transoceanic vessel was simply not there. A Phoenician trader might brave the coastal route down Africa for gold and ivory, but to commit to a months-long, open ocean crossing into sheer mystery, with no guarantee of return or profit, was not a sustainable cultural enterprise. Occasional, accidental voyages driven off course by storms may have occurred, and tantalizing clues like Roman coins in the Americas spark endless debate. But these lack the corroborating evidence of a sustained exchange, the back-and-forth traffic that leaves behind layers of pottery, changed languages, and imported animals. The Atlantic remained a one-way street, or more accurately, a daunting barrier, because the cultural commitment to master it systematically was absent. This comparison ultimately highlights the most crucial ingredient in the story of ancient ocean crossing. It was not merely about having the technology, but about having a reason to use it relentlessly for generations. The brilliant engineering packages of the Pacific and Indian Oceans were not born in isolation. They were forged by cultures whose very identity was intertwined with the sea, for whom the reward was worth the monumental risk. But one vessel stands apart from all these designs, a platform that seems to defy the very principles of ocean engineering. It is the sailing raft, a concept so simple it appears primitive, yet its story is wrapped in one of history's most captivating and contentious maritime mysteries. This is the tale of the balsa raft, and the bold experiment that forced the world to reconsider what was possible. Along the Pacific coast of South America, cultures like the Moche and later the Inca used large rafts constructed from the incredibly buoyant logs of the balsa tree. These were not crude bundles of driftwood. They were sophisticated craft, sometimes reaching the size of a large ship, built by lashing together multiple balsa logs in a layered, staggered pattern. The balsa wood itself was the first key to their potential. Freshly cut, balsa is lightweight and full of air-filled cells, making it more buoyant than cork. A properly constructed raft of these logs could carry a substantial crew and cargo while riding high on the water. But a raft has a fundamental problem. It is at the mercy of the current and wind, with little ability to steer or sail against the wind. Ancient engineers on this coast solved this with a brilliant, adjustable tool called the garra. These were not rudders or leeboards in the traditional sense. They were large, dagger-shaped centerboards made of wood, inserted vertically through gaps between the logs at various points along the raft. By raising or lowering these garras at different depths, sailors could dramatically alter the raft's underwater profile and pivot point. To change direction, they could simply adjust the depth of a garra near the stern, using the water's resistance to swing the entire platform. To resist leeway and sail across the wind, they could deploy garras along the sides. This gave them a surprising degree of control, augmented by a large square sail woven from cotton. The system was utterly unique, a steering mechanism based on leverage and balance rather than a fixed rudder. For centuries, these rafts were known to be capable coastal traders, moving goods along the western edge of South America. But the monumental question remained, could such a vessel, a raft, possibly cross the Pacific Ocean deliberately? This question exploded into global debate in the middle of the 20th century, thanks to a daring Norwegian adventurer and ethnographer named Thor Heyerdahl. Heyerdahl studied the legends and stone carvings of Polynesia and South America, and he formed a radical hypothesis. He proposed that Polynesia could have been settled from the east by pre-Columbian South Americans using these very balsa rafts, riding the prevailing currents and winds. The academic establishment of the time dismissed the idea outright. Experts argued that a raft was inherently a passive vessel, incapable of true ocean navigation, and that any such crossing would have been a one-way, accidental drift, not a deliberate voyage. To prove them wrong, Heyerdahl decided on an audacious approach. He would build a replica using only the materials and methods available to those ancient people, and he would attempt the crossing himself. In 1947, he and a small crew constructed the Kon-Tiki, a balsa log raft based directly on historical descriptions. They lashed 9 large balsa logs together with hemp rope, built a small open hut on the deck, and raised a simple square sail. With no modern navigation instruments, they set sail from Peru, aiming for the islands of Polynesia. For 101 days, the Kon-Tiki drifted and sailed on the Humboldt and South Equatorial currents. The crew faced storms, sharks, and the relentless sun, but the raft itself performed remarkably. The balsa logs absorbed water, but a clever design feature kept them buoyant. The outer sapwood acted as a permeable barrier, while the inner heartwood remained dry. The garras allowed them a measure of steering. Ultimately, after a voyage of around 4,000 miles, the raft made landfall on the Raroya Atoll in the Tuamotu Islands. Heyerdahl had proven his central point beyond doubt. A pre-Columbian-style balsa raft could make the journey from South America to Polynesia. The Kon-Tiki expedition became a worldwide sensation, a story of human grit against the ocean. But in the calm after the storm of publicity, a more nuanced debate took shape among scholars. Heyerdahl proved the possibility of contact, but did he prove the reality of colonization? Critics pointed out that while the raft survived the journey, its steering was limited. The Kon-Tiki was largely carried by the current, its path more of a guided drift than a navigated course. To many archaeologists and linguists, this did not match the evidence we see in Polynesia, which shows a clear, deliberate, and reciprocal pattern of settlement from the West, from Asia, not a one-way pulse from the Americas. The sustained cultural package, the language, the animals, the detailed star navigation, all point to a different origin, yet the experiment left an indelible mark. It forced a re-evaluation of maritime capabilities and opened the door to the possibility of occasional, transformative contact. The strongest evidence for this may not be the raft itself, but what it could have carried. The presence of the sweet potato in Polynesia, a plant definitively native to South America, remains one of the most compelling clues. A single balsa raft, whether blown off course in a storm or deliberately venturing out, could have carried that vital crop across the ocean, where it was adopted and spread by the Polynesian settlers already there. The sailing raft, therefore, occupies a unique and controversial space. It was a viable, ingenious vessel for its coastal environment, and under the right conditions, a transoceanic raft of this design was certainly survivable. The Kon-Tiki showed that the ocean was a connector, not just a barrier, but whether these rafts represent a lost chapter of deliberate Pacific colonization or stand as brilliant monuments to the unpredictable power of drift and chance remains one of the sea's most enduring and fascinating puzzles. The seas they mastered did not stay the same forever. After centuries of breathtaking expansion, the great voyaging traditions of the Pacific, particularly the long-distance journeys between far-flung archipelagos, began to fade. The double-hulled canoes that once crossed thousands of miles of open ocean increasingly stayed closer to home, their routes shrinking to inter-island travel within known groups. This was not a failure of knowledge or courage, but a profound historical shift, a story where the technology remained brilliant, but the urgent need for it quietly changed. One compelling theory points to a changing world. Around the year 1300, the climate of the Pacific entered a cooler, more volatile phase scientists call the Little Ice Age. Storm patterns may have intensified, and wind currents could have shifted, making the long, predictable voyages of earlier centuries far more hazardous and unpredictable. The ocean highways they had memorized over generations were rewriting their rules, and the risk-reward calculation for setting out into the blue void may have tilted decisively toward staying put. At the same time, the very resources that made the voyages possible were becoming scarce. Building a great voyaging canoe required immense, straight trees for the hulls, often specific species like the koa or tamanu. As islands were settled and populations grew, these giant trees, which take centuries to mature, were harvested for canoes for building and for agriculture. The depletion of these vital timber resources meant that constructing a new ocean-going vessel became a monumental, sometimes impossible task. The knowledge of how to build one remained, but the raw materials slowly vanished from many islands, grounding the fleet before it could even be launched. Perhaps the most significant change, however, was social. The primary engine for the voyaging age was the search for new land. Once the vast Pacific was fully settled, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui, that driving purpose was fulfilled. The cultural energy shifted from exploration to consolidation, from finding new islands to building complex societies on the ones they had. Maintaining the intense, specialized training for master navigators and the communal effort to build and provision a voyaging canoe required a society wholly oriented toward that goal. As chiefdoms grew and turned their attention to local politics, agriculture, and monument building, that focus inevitably softened. The voyaging knowledge did not disappear overnight. It simply retreated into memory, practiced less frequently until it became a revered legend rather than a daily skill. This quiet decline holds a crucial lesson about technology. The canoe, the sail, and the navigator's science were not standalone inventions. They were parts of a living system, deeply woven into a specific cultural moment. They flourished when a society needed them to survive, to expand, to fulfill its destiny. When that need changed, when the frontiers closed or the priorities turned inward, the system naturally receded. The story does not end with loss, but with transformation, a reminder that human innovation is always a conversation between a brilliant mind and the world it seeks to understand. Yet the knowledge was never truly lost, only sleeping. In the 1970s, a quiet revolution began on the beaches of Hawaii, a movement that would awaken that sleeping genius and prove its power to a skeptical modern world. This was the story of the Hokule'a, a name meaning star of gladness, and its journey was one of both scientific validation and profound cultural healing. At the time, many academics still dismissed Polynesian settlement as a series of accidental drifts, a narrative that deeply wounded the pride of native Hawaiian communities. A group of scholars and cultural practitioners forming the Polynesian Voyaging Society decided to challenge this notion in the most direct way possible. They would build a replica of a traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe, using only the materials and designs inferred from historical sources and oral histories, and they would sail it across the Pacific using only the ancient wayfinding techniques. The Hokule'a was not a modern yacht with a traditional disguise. Its two hulls were lashed together, Its sails were crafted from traditional patterns, and it carried no compass, no sextant, and certainly no GPS. Its heart was a living navigator, a Micronesian master named Maupiailug from the small island of Satawal, who held the nearly extinct knowledge of non-instrument navigation. In 1976, the Hokule'a set sail from Hawaii for Tahiti, a voyage of over 2,500 miles. For 33 days, Maupiailug guided the vessel. He read the stars, felt the swells, watched the birds and clouds, synthesizing this constant stream of environmental data just as his ancestors had. When the canoe finally made landfall in Papeete, it was met by a crowd of over half the island's population, 17,000 people weeping with joy. The voyage was a triumph of experimental archaeology. It proved beyond any doubt that the engineered system worked with stunning precision. The lashed hulls flexed and held. The crab-claw sails harnessed the wind, and the human mind, trained in this ancient science, could indeed navigate a vast ocean with pinpoint accuracy. But the impact went far beyond academic journals. For native Hawaiians and Polynesians across the Pacific, the Hokule'a was a cultural resurrection. It shattered the myth of accidental discovery and replaced it with a narrative of intentional genius and profound skill. It sparked a renaissance in language, canoe building, and navigation, inspiring a new generation to learn the ways of their ancestors. The canoe became a floating classroom and a symbol of identity, demonstrating that this was not primitive technology, but a sophisticated, sustainable science born of deep intimacy with the natural world. The success of the Hokule'a and its subsequent voyages around the globe did more than validate the past. It reconnected a people to their heritage, proving that the greatest voyages are sometimes those that bring you home to yourself. Each individual innovation was a stroke of genius, but its true power was only unlocked in concert with the others. The ancient ocean-going vessel was not a collection of parts. It was a single, breathing organism, a perfectly integrated technological system where every piece answered a question posed by another. This interdependence is the ultimate secret to its success. Consider the sequence. The multi-hull design created a stable, wide platform. That stability was not an end in itself. It was the necessary foundation that allowed for the next layer, the living world. Without that steady deck, you could not safely carry the navigator's family, the seedlings in their soil, the live animals, or the delicate freshwater gourds. The hull's flexible lashings allowed it to survive the sea's punishment, which in turn protected that precious cargo for the long haul. That cargo sustained the most vital component of all, the human mind. The navigator, nourished and sheltered, could then focus entirely on his art. He read the stars and swells, processing environmental data to choose a course. But a chosen course is just a thought without the means of execution. This is where the sail and the leeboard entered the conversation. The specialized lateen or crab-claw sail, with its ability to pull power from crosswinds, gave the vessel the physical capability to sail the precise angle the navigator demanded. And when the wind tried to push them sideways off that delicate line, the leeboard bit into the water, counteracting that drift and purifying their forward motion. The ship literally obeyed the navigator's will. Even the repair materials stored in the hull played their part, ensuring the vessel could maintain its integrity long enough for the navigator to complete his mental map. This was a closed loop of function and need. You could not have the navigation without the sustenance the platform carried. You could not act on the navigation without the specific sail and steering technologies. Remove any one piece, and the entire enterprise collapses from a calculated voyage into a desperate gamble. This deep integration is what separates these vessels from mere boats. They were purpose-built systems, engineered from the keel up with a single goal: to transform human intention into geographic destiny across the trackless blue. In that light, they stand among history's most elegant and ambitious machines, not of metal and steam, but of wood, wind, and woven knowledge. This ancient integrated system did not vanish into history, it evolved. The brilliance of those early maritime engineers echoes directly in the boats we build and sail today, proving their solutions were not just effective for their time, but fundamentally correct. Look at any modern marina or sailing race, and you will see their legacy cutting through the water. The multi-hull principle, perfected by Polynesian and Austronesian cultures, now defines the cutting edge of speed and stability. The catamaran and trimaran are not new ideas, they are the refined descendants of the double-hulled voyaging canoe. By spreading the vessel's footprint across 2 or 3 narrow hulls, they achieve that same magical combination of reduced drag for speed and immense stability for carrying sail, just as they did 1,000 years ago. Today's ocean racing catamarans, capable of incredible speeds, operate on the exact same hydrodynamic logic that allowed ancient canoes to cross the Pacific. The sail that changed everything, the lateen-rigged of the Indian Ocean, underwent its own evolution in the Atlantic. Its triangular, fore and aft shape proved so efficient at sailing across the wind that it gradually transformed into the Bermuda rig, the nearly universal sail plan on modern sloops and yachts. That distinctive triangular mainsail mounted on a tall mast is a direct linear descendant of the lateen, using the same aerodynamic principle of lift over drag. The ancient quest for safety through compartmentalization, mastered in Chinese junks, is now an unquestioned law of the sea. Every large ship afloat, from container vessels to cruise liners, is built with watertight bulkheads. This is not a modern innovation, it is a millennia-old best practice written into international maritime law, a silent tribute to the shipwrights who first understood that dividing a hull could save it. Even the most abstract of their arts, celestial navigation, finds its spirit in our most advanced technology. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, functions on a startlingly similar principle. Instead of using the fixed stars of the celestial sphere, it uses a constellation of artificial satellites as fixed reference points. A modern receiver triangulates its position by calculating its distance from several of these known points in the sky, a digital echo of the wayfinder who fixed his position by the rising points of specific stars on the horizon. The tools have changed from sextant to silicon, but the underlying logic of plotting a position from known celestial markers remains intact. This enduring influence is the ultimate testament to their engineering. They were not merely building boats, they were discovering fundamental truths about hydrodynamics, aerodynamics, and systems management. Their solutions were so elegant, so perfectly adapted to the physics of wind and water, that when modern materials like fiberglass and carbon fiber finally arrived, we did not invent new shapes, we simply used those materials to build their ancient, brilliant ideas better, faster, and stronger. The ghost of the waʻa kaulua sails in every catamaran, the shadow of the lateen falls on every Bermuda sail, and the logic of the Master Navigator is embedded in every satellite signal that guides a ship safely home. The story of these voyages is not one of luck but of design. Ancient mariners did not simply stumble upon distant shores, they built their way there. Their success across the open ocean was not a mystery of fate, but the direct result of a complete and deliberate technological system, a suite of interlocking innovations that turned a terrifying void into a navigable highway. It began with the hull, reimagined as a flexible, stable platform that could dance with the waves rather than fight them. It was powered by intelligent sails that pulled energy from the wind itself, not just caught it from behind. It was guided by a navigation science that read the stars, the swells, and the sky as a living map, and it was sustained by a logistical genius that transformed the vessel into a self-contained world, carrying the very seeds of a new life. Each piece answered a question posed by the others, creating a closed loop of survival and purpose. What this reveals is a profound truth about human ingenuity. Faced with an impossible frontier, our ancestors did not shrink from it, they studied it. They observed the patterns of the wind and water, and they engineered solutions that were not brute force, but elegant partnerships with the natural world. Their drive to explore was not a vague wanderlust. It was a focused, generational project fueled by curiosity, necessity, and an unshakable will to see what lay beyond the horizon. These crossings were among humanity's greatest adventures, epic journeys that connected continents and populated a third of our planet. They were enabled not by primitive technology, but by technology that was perfectly, brilliantly adapted to its monumental challenge. It was a science of the sea, written in wood and woven in memory, and its legacy still sails with us today. We would love to hear what part of this story resonated most with you, so share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more tales of forgotten genius, be sure to subscribe.